So welcome back. Thank you all so much for all the great conversation all day long, and we're not finished yet. For our final panel, we're going to be talking about the next steps and at least some thoughts on some action plan for how we really actually make this criminal law reform a reality. So let me just kind of recap for you real quick, what we've talked about. We started out the day by talking about the overview of the policy and had national policy experts talk about why this is important and why we're at a critical point. The second panel talked about local laws, the number of laws, the confusion within the system, and the problems that, from a practical standpoint, from law enforcement and through the district attorneys and through the judicial system, the problems that we have. We heard from Chief Justice Martin on do we have the balance right, and offering questions like uniform enforcement, uniform justice, clarity, what is the burden of our current system. And then, also I thought it was interesting that he mentioned the change comes from the North Carolina General Assembly. They will be the ones that will have to set the playbook for this. During our third panel, we heard more about how to do this, how to build a better code with Professor Smith's suggestions of the 4 different ways to do that. Non-political community commitment, we heard from Representative Moray, and then from Rose Williams, the perspective of local governments and municipalities in this. So here we are with our 4th panel talking about now what? And so I wanted to start with giving you a little bit of a review of what has happened legislatively on this issue. This kind of started, actually, Jim, I think it was in 2015, Jim Copeland had written about overcriminalization. We were beginning to look at this. Jim came and did a presentation for us at the John Locke Foundation, and then we made visits at the North Carolina General Assembly. And over 2 or 3 days, we saw several dozen lawmakers, both sides of the aisle, freshmen, veteran lawmakers, you name it, and had universal interest in this issue and universal, not just support, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but commitments that I want to be involved in this. And so we've seen that carried through during that time. In 2017, there was an amendment that was filed to House Bill 482 at the very end of the long session. This was the same year that Justice Martin was doing his Raise the Age initiative, and so there were several things going on that had to do with this. This was proposed, again, at the very end of the session, and it established a criminal code recodification commission within the North Carolina Administrative Office of the Courts and set up who would sit on that commission and what that charge was. Now, that was an amendment to House Bill 482. It passed the Senate unanimously and then really just ran out of runway for the long session, just ran out of time. So it was set aside, and then that whole issue was revisited in 2018, and this came about from some conversations. Jesse Smith was involved in those conversations, Stephen Walker, and several others and legislators who said maybe the commission is a little bit premature. Maybe the first thing that we need to do is have a mechanism where we get all of these laws all in one place, across Chapter 14, across the general statutes, all of the rules and regulations within state agencies, all of the criminal ordinances with the local governments, and then everything with the boards and commissions, at least get those in one place. So in 2018, House Bill 379 passed and was signed into law that required all state agencies, boards and commissions, also local governments, to submit their common law crimes and criminal statutes to the General Assembly. So then this year, in 2019, Senate Bill 584 passed, and this made changes to future criminal laws related to regulatory offenses and to extend the time for local governments to report those ordinances with criminal penalties and to require the General Statutes Commission to study current offenses not enacted by statute. So there's been three bills, three pieces of legislation historically that are moving towards that. So just to kind of lay that landscape for you as we begin this next part of our discussion. And I've just made some notes on some of the comments that have been made during the committee discussion and during the discussion on the floor at the General Assembly, and two that I wanted to pass along to you. This has been called, this could be the most significant legislation passed in the last decade of moving forward with this recodification. We also had a comment, we have a unified criminal court system. What we need is a unified criminal law system, and this would give us that. So strong support for this, strong interest as we have moved along with this. And so for this final panel of, okay, where do we go? We've invited three legislators who have been committed to this project for a number of years. And Sarah Stevens is the current Speaker Pro Tem of the House. She has served in the General Assembly since 2009. She is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and Campbell University School of Law. She is the past president of the Curry County Bar Association and has been very involved. She's been the chair of the Judiciary Committee, the Children, Youth, and Families, and the North Carolina Courts Commission, and has been very involved in this, and we are very grateful for her leadership in this. Senator Warren Daniel is a graduate of West Point. He served our country for 6 years as an Army officer and then graduated with honors from the UNC School of Law. He's argued cases at every level of the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. He was elected to the North Carolina Senate in 2010 and is currently serving in his 5th term. He has been the co-chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee for the last 9 years. Thank you for your leadership. And we also have Representative Ted Davis. I almost gave you a raise there, gave you a promotion. Senator Davis graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a degree in political science and law school from Wake Forest University. He has served as an assistant state district attorney, an assistant U.S. attorney, and has been in private practice. He served as the New Hanover County Commissioner for 16 years, with 5 of those as the chairman of the county commission. He was first elected to the House in 2013 and has also served as the senior chair of the House Judiciary Committee and also as the chair of the House Committee on Appropriations for Justice and Public Safety. So thank you all for your leadership in this effort. And so, Representative Stevens, I think I'll start with you. I think that was the committee's decision that we would start with you. So I'm really interested in your comments on this and where you see this going as a legislative leader in these efforts.
Thank you, Becky. This is an issue that we've been talking about for a while. And as somebody said, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. The problem is, this is not an elephant. This is a herd of elephants. We need to understand the complexity of the situation. So as we've talked about how to somewhat break this down, is first, and the first step, which is what we're already working on, is to catalog what are all the crimes, where are they, what do they do, are they really needed, and then to categorize them. Can we break them down into categories, look for those that are duplicative, and then move forward from there. Well, as you move forward from there, what do? Because you have different stakeholders involved in every group, basically. You do have the state crime laws, where you're going to have the courts and the DAs and the public defenders and some lay people and some sheriffs and some other law enforcement officers who are going to want to be involved as we start recodifying our state criminal code. But then you also have city and county, which we give the authority for them to do these things. And so I'm a little embarrassed to say that it was my town that did the silly string. I practiced law for 33 years and didn't know we had that statute. I actually contacted our city manager, who does not know that we had this law as well. So we're all trying to figure out where it came from and what was the need for it. And so why did we have to pass that into a law? And I think that's something we want to look at. And going forward, how much more authority do we want cities and counties to be able to have? We should be able to somewhat codify based upon what we get from cities and counties, and as we gather that information and categorize it, we may be able to put more limitations and more structure on how cities and counties will react to certain issues. Then your third issue is administrative agencies. people who license lawyers and doctors and dentists and home builders and contractors, they frequently write rules that have criminal penalties in them. And so we have to take a look at that too, which is again a different set of people who would be interested. As I've been sort of evolving this situation and talking about it, I've thought, well, if we really, in order to make action happen, I'm sorry, I know people have met many times and tried to work on this, and as I think Dean Leonard said, you've got to have somebody advocating for it. The family bar comes to me every year with a list of bills and things they need changed. And then you have the estate section comes, and the real estate section. They all come forward and bring ideas and bring laws and get some strong advocate to go forward and get those things passed. In order to get this done, you're going to have some strong members of the General Assembly who are willing to see it through, who are willing to take this herd of elephants, gather them together, bite them into the small pieces, and feed them to the 170 cats that we have to herd at the General Assembly. Am I correct there, guys? All 170 cats have got to, or at least the majority of them have got to get on board with that. So they need to understand the history and the background and where things come from. And bear in mind that a lot of these, and I hate to pick on Ted, but he's sitting down there, so I will. Larceny of the Venus flytrap being a felony, and that was very, very important to Ted.
That was a good deal.
But it's a larceny. It is a larceny. And so do we put all larcenies under a particular category and then talk about aggravating factors within the larceny statute? Is that something we can do that will take away several chapters of the general statutes? Is that a process we start to go through? And then as I see a step beyond that, once we've reached this wonderful recodification and everything is in one statute book, all of the laws that have criminal penalties are all in one book. So what do we do next? I think, and again, this is me, and I got 169 other cats. We set up almost like the sentencing commission, we set up a criminal reform commission that says, okay, you want to do this statute, but have you thought there's already this in place that may take care of it? Or maybe you just need to tweak that. Something that would periodically review the new criminal laws that come up to see, is this really needed? Where do we go from here? I'm a lawyer. I figure I know everything, right? But it's been very interesting to sit with Carson Smith, who's in the General Assembly with me, who's a sheriff, and talks to me more about from the sheriff's side of it as opposed to what's in the courtroom. To talk to some of the victims, as we've talked about today, the victims that aren't getting heard from. They need to be having some input. Defense attorneys as well as prosecutors. We need to include everyone. We talked about, we just got to file a bill and everything will be better. We can fix it all tomorrow because we have that power and that ability. But even the one statute she talked about, as Becky Gray was talking about the statute of trying to get the cities to bring forth their information and threatening to put out, you will have a sunset on all your laws. Well, that got our prosecutors upset because the way it was worded, they said it could easily be interpreted that all common law crimes are now abolished. All common law. If a statute doesn't exist, then all common law is abolished. So it's making sure we don't hit those unintended consequences as well. So that's why we want to take a slow, deliberative process. It's not going to be a foot dragging, but Andy Wells, who's not a lawyer and he's not here to defend himself, he's one of the senators that are key on this, said, I'd love to see it done in a year. I don't know that we can do this in a year, just because of the massive quantity we have, and until we catalog and categorize, I don't think we'll have a real feel for how quickly we can get it done. I'm willing to be committed as long as I'm in the General Assembly, but as I said, this is my 6th term, and I'm a senior member. Remember, terms are only 2 years. I've not been there forever. I'm not making this a career. Law is my career. So it's having some consistency enough and interest enough they can stay and see it get done. So that's some of the issues. That's why it's not a simple, we recognize it needs to be done, it's important, but it is a herd of elephants, not a single elephant, even though one elephant's hard to eat.
Thank you. Senator Dan?
Thank you, Becky. I would just say that over my observations as being one of the Judiciary Committee co-chairs over the past 9 years has been that asking the legislature to do a project like this is really kind of doing a 180 in terms of what members are used to doing, because every member, a new session starts, a lot of members come from their districts and they've had a bad situation, like the Venus flytrap theft or something like that, a bad boat accident, and they say, our criminal laws don't address this nuance, and so, month after month, year after year, we're going in that direction. What new laws can we create? What enhanced penalties can we come up with? So this is like you're asking the legislature to do something that we're unaccustomed to doing. So I think that's one of the challenges. Obviously, the large body of laws that are out there that are uncodified is an issue that we really don't even know the magnitude of yet. And I've started getting, and I'm sure these members have too, we're starting to get the reports trickling in from counties and cities across the state. Well, this is one that I printed out that came to me in the last week, and it's just one county. It's 16 pages, so if you think here's a 16-page document from one county and there's 99 others, how many more things are out there that need to be looked at? So I do think this is going to be a long-term process. I hope by that I mean 2 or 3 years and not 5 or 7. But since we're a part-time legislature with fewer and fewer lawyers, it seems like these days, then that's one of the things that makes it difficult, because we all have our businesses that we're trying to run, and so this is something that if you could get a lot of the members, if you could put us in a room and we could meet 5 days a week for a month or so, we could probably figure this out pretty quickly, but it's just time constraints wouldn't allow that. So anyway, it's certainly an important project, and I look forward to working on it. I'm assuming that whether I wanted to be involved or I'm going to be. So, and I want to be, because I want to make sure it's done right too. So.
Just trust me, I'll get it right.
Thank you. Representative Davis, what are your thoughts on this?
First of all, thank you for letting me be here.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate y'all letting me come and talk with you. I'm kind of a meat and potato guy. I look at something, I want to know what the problem is, and I want to try to figure out what caused the problem. Then I want to figure out how we can solve the problem. And as Sarah and Warren have alluded to, this is a huge undertaking. You've got laws out there that are not only duplicative, but you've got laws out there that are unconstitutional. You've got laws out there that are outdated. And somebody has got to sit there, and like Sarah said, figure out what all these laws are. And then you got to sit there and figure out which ones are unconstitutional, which ones are outdated, which ones can be centered into one major law. It's going to be a huge undertaking. So my thought was, I'll give you an analogy. As you all know, there's been a lot of problems with pollution in our waters. And so I chaired a committee in the interim. As you know, in the biennium, every legislative session is 2 years. Every biennium, you have a long session, which we're in now, which is really a long session. And then we'll go into a short session, which in the past have been long, short sessions. But in the middle, in the interim period, a lot of times the chambers will have interim committees that will meet, start talking about issues and things that might be brought up in the short session, or even take it over to your next biennium. And one thing we did with that River Quality Committee was I had toxicologists come in, we had scientists come in, we had engineers come in, we had all these different types of people to come to give their input. And what I thought it might be good to start with an interim committee dealing with this reform and the fact that we want to hear, I want to hear from district attorneys, I want to hear from the defense bar, I want to hear from judges, I want to hear from magistrates, I want to hear from sheriffs, police officers, a wide assortment of stakeholders who are involved so that we can sort of figure out and get their input as what they see the problems are as far as the number of laws that we have and their recommendations. And that could lead to going into the short session, depending on how that goes. And I would hope that you could either do it just in the House, or you could do it just in the Senate, or we could have joint oversight committee, which I think would be good, where you have House and Senate members present. And at least it would give us a leap forward to getting some ideas about where we can go, because as Warren was saying, you don't want this thing to be an 8 to 10 year process. You want to try to get it done and get it done as quickly as possible. And depending on how that went, that may very well lead to permanent committees, either in the House or the Senate or a joint committee to get this job done. I'm the House representative on the General Statutes Commission. And I know there's something before the General Statutes Commission right now about looking at county laws. But that commission only meets maybe once a month. And it's primarily made up of law school deans, and we have other members there. And that's just a huge undertaking. I know the commission would be willing to do it if that's the way you want to go. And I would hope that if the commission did that, then if there was a subcommittee created or whatever, we've got to have that input. We've got to have the input for all the different stakeholders like I talked about earlier. So there are different ways, and it's good to discuss this and get everybody's idea about how to go, because you could do the interim thing and then go to the General Statutes Commission. Or you could do it without the General Statutes Commission. Or you could just give it to the General Statutes Commission. So there are all different options that we have, but the main thing is we got to get it done. And we need to get it done as quickly as possible. And that Venus flytrap was a good deal. I have to admit, I probably did help with the problem, because you think of all the different larcenies that you have, but all you need to have is one larceny. I know when I was looking at that bill and the punishment level, I didn't realize stealing somebody's fire straw was a felony. Stealing ginseng is a felony. I mean, it really makes it all these different things. And, you know, that's just a good example of how we can possibly streamline the criminal code. But once again, I look forward to hearing what comments y'all have to make and suggestions, so we can all work on this together. Once again, get it done soon.
Thank you so much. I've got just a couple follow-up questions. So, you know, one thing that I think we've talked about all day, and I think everybody in this room agrees, is this is an important issue and it's something that we should certainly address. But I want to just get maybe a little bit more in the weeds with this. And Representative Davis, I like your idea of an interim commission of getting experts to come in. It's something the General Assembly does regularly. People are used to that. Bring in many of the people in the panelists that we've had today, I would recommend. Also, I think it was mentioned earlier, there is a real national attention on this and a national interest in this. We've been contacted at the Locke Foundation with think tanks in other states who have said, we understand you're working on this, tell us more, we want to know how things are going. And Jim, you know this with your work and the work with Cato as well, you all are seeing that in other states and even at a federal level. So I think when you talk about stakeholders or bringing experts in, we're not just talking about people in North Carolina, we're talking about people all over the country who want to be involved and want to weigh in on this. North Carolina has set ourselves out as a model with tax reform, with regulatory reform, school choice, and many other things. And so I think people more and more are looking at North Carolina as a national model for these big, bold reforms. I don't think that's out of place at all, and certainly something that we should look at and take advantage of, you know, with this. But on this commission, whether it is under the General Statutes Commission, whether that would be members of the General Statutes Commission or being overseen by the General Statutes Commission, are there other ideas on that you all want to kind of ferret out? Should it be, who would be on that? What would they do? You know, rather than just talking about, yes, this is a good idea, let's all hold hands and agree on that. What are we going to do? You know, I mean, is there a small group that can really put some things forward, not get the whole thing done in a year, but at least make good progress with that? Do you have any thoughts on that? Sarah?
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to go with Ted first, because you sort of spoke to him. But I think the critical thing about why this is going to be most effective to be done at this time is because the Locke Foundation has devoted so much time to it, and people who are looking at it and people who are gathering the information and starting to categorize it for us. There is the use of the computer systems these days that can help us to start combining those elements, compare and contrast. We also, by putting it through the General Assembly, we have legislative staff that in the off session can be looking at a lot of those things. Then I think after you get to that point, you start looking at the things that Jesse Smith was talking about, the 5 things about what do we do? Is this a law that we really needed? Does it meet all of those 5 elements that she was discussing? I thought it was a great place to start. And I think that's probably more when you get down to actual committee work, making those final policy decisions. That's going to be the legislators. I think you do have the underlying committees and groups that talk about these things, but then I think you get to the legislators making the final policy decisions, helping give some guidance. I think that's what's going to be so critical, is these other groups that have the interest and say, here's what we would propose to do in the criminal code. We propose to put everything in here and then cross-reference it to whatever part of the statute it goes to. We have people who say, okay, here's what is in the administrative code that needs to now come into this one statute on criminal law with cross-references to where it should appropriately be. Same thing for cities and counties. I think it's going to take a lot of outside work, as Warren said. We are a part-time legislature. Some of us will devote more time to it, but we've had the School of Government help us with lots of things. We've had our staff help us with lots of things. Now the Locke Foundation helping us with lots of things. The Cato group helping us with lots of things. The Manhattan Institute's got lots of ideas. So we've got lots of resources to draw from, and I think that's critical to massing that information. And maybe we get down to the one elephant, and then we can start taking that one bite at a time.
Mm-hmm. There's a comment that made, and Jessica, I think you were the one that made this during the Q&A about the authorization that municipalities have to pass these ordinances. That authorization was granted by the General Assembly. The General Assembly is the only one that can change that, and that's just one example. But if these changes are going to have to be made, because the General Assembly is the one that's made all these criminal laws, they're the ones that are going to have to fix it. Now, you need a lot of help with it. We understand that. I think it comes back to that.
Yes, and as I think Representative John was talking about, we grant them the authority, but we can blanketly remove all that authority too, and we can sunset every municipal statute or county statute that's out there, county ordinance that's out there, with just a swipe of the pen. We could do all that. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to overreact. We want to make a deliberative decision.
Right, and to Rose's point earlier, it needs to be done deliberately and thoughtfully, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Representative Davis, did you want to add your thoughts?
It's interesting when you look at the different ways you might compose a group. If you're talking about an interim legislative committee, then the legislators would be the actual members. And like I said, with that river quality committee, you could ask all these different people, like district attorneys and judges and sheriffs and all these people to come in and talk to that committee. Of course, it would be up to, if it's a House committee, it would be up to the speaker who's on it. But I know he will confer with Sarah and who he thought would be good to be on it. In the Senate, it would be Pro Tem, and I'm sure he would speak with Warren and Don Britt, who's his other chair of the judiciary, about who might be on. To get all that outside input, if there's a General Statutes Commission, well, you only have 2 legislators on. I'm from the House, and then you have a Senate representative, then you have the deans of the law school, you've got a representative from the state bar, I mean, you have different outside people. As far as that is concerned, but they don't, you would have to bring in all this extra people in order to talk with them, to educate them on what the possibilities are and the concerns are. Or if you did like Sarah was talking about, did an independent commission. Now that's a different item. And the President Pro Tem, the Speaker, could get together on that and say, well, there'll be X number of representatives from the House. There'll be X number of representatives from the Senate. There'll be a representative from the District Attorneys Association. There'll be a representative from the Defense Department. I mean, you can go at it that way.
If you went at it that way, who would you put on that?
It would be a large committee, committee, because there you're looking at, to me, a different way of approaching than you would be a legislative when you have all the outside people come in. When you're looking at a commission, I mean, you could have a representative of all these different entities, which would make it rather large, but that would be good for a group as far as the discussion and decision making. To me, it's just kind of all how you want to go about it. I can see each individual entity, depending on what that is, approaching it a different way.
Could you almost see, if it was a large group, could you see subgroups within that?
You can always do that. I mean, you'd have to pick a chairman, you'd have some other ones. But one thing that was good, if I could digress just a minute, on that river quality committee, every meeting when it was over, I met with staff. And we would decide who we wanted to come and speak at the next meeting. Because a lot of times things would come up at the meeting we just had, said, oh, we ought to get so-and-so to come in and answer that question. Yeah, that's an excellent point. We didn't think about that. We need to get somebody to come in and address that, so it kind of feeds off each other. And that's why I like that approach myself, because it worked. We had long meetings, but they were just cram-packed full of things. And as a result of that, we came out with not so much proposed legislation, but as proposed funding to help to address those issues. And then we moved forward and it went over to the Senate. We ended up being able to do something as far as funding at the end. But once again, I'm just trying to think about, like I said earlier, a group that can get together. What's the problem? How do we get there? How do we fix it? And how do we get to fix it?
Right, and I guess that's the key, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get to. What does that group look like? I mean, because you want 6, 8 people to start this to really get it underway. And Sarah, you've served on previous commissions that have worked well, that you've had some good experiences with.
We did social services working group on the reform of the social services system and some regional supervision. And I will tell you, the School of Government was instrumental in that, helping us do the research, gathering the information, putting things together for a report. And we did have a group of, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, we had maybe 24 people on that group. And of the 24 people, 20 were regularly active. And that made an incredible experience. They really participated, brought in information. And then we had someone in the interim to answer questions for us or to find information for us and bring it back together to work on making some decision process. Again, social services, so we had county commissioners, we had, I think the cities even sent someone there. We had directors of social services, we had their attorneys, we had people from the state level, we had an incredible group of judges, district court judges who worked very well in that system. And so it was critical to get all of that input together and then bring it back to one of the oversight groups, the oversight group on health and human services. And they could see the amount of work that we had done, which made it more easily acceptable for the group. But we did have 3 House members and 3 Senate members there as well. And so they knew that we had gotten together the information that they truly needed for making their decisions, moving forward with their legislation.
So we have some good examples. We're not inventing the wheel.
We do. We're not reinventing the wheel.
Right. I want to take a little bit different direction. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, because we're talking about ideas here and kind of sorting through some of those things, that we were going to start, Sarah, as you've mentioned, and I think it was Representative Moray who referenced this, taking a bite out of the elephant or the herd of elephants. This is a big, heavy lift and a very complicated problem. But we've got to start somewhere. So if we were going to start with one chapter or one section that we would attack just to say, okay, this is what this would look like, to kind of get into without trying to do the whole thing and fall into all the pitfalls that may be there. Let's just do one thing with a group of, 6, 8 people with the expertise, Representative Davis, that you're talking about. Let's assume we've got the right people at the table, 6, 8 folks who are dedicated to really get this done. I want to ask each of you, where would you start? Where would be an appropriate page to pull out of this very big volume to start this project? I'll start with you.
I think chapter 14, simply because of the fact you've got your legislation is codified in that, and it's easy to look at. Otherwise you want to talk about municipal laws. My gosh, that'll take you forever.
Well, I think Senator Daniel has a 16-page report from one county.
That was all I had too. There was a joint oversight committee on justice and public safety. there's also a mechanism that you might want to do that. I know I was a chair of that, and what we did there was people would come in with new ideas about legislation, and we discussed that. So that's an avenue that you already have in place that might be able to be used.
Okay, in addition to the General Statutes Commission.
It's just like my understanding of what was asked of the General Statutes Commission initially was to look at the county ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you should throw the whole kit caboodle on and say,
Right.
get it out there. So that was streamlined because that was thought to have been something that, the commission could be able to address and look at and not be overwhelmed right off the get-go.
Okay, well, and tell me too, okay, so, in chapter 14, what are you looking for?
There, I will be looking at, if there are 10 larcenies, which my biggest flat trap would be willing, is it best to get rid of 10, but that's how many there are, just have one larceny. And then as far as the sentencing, you could look at as far as punishment, you could address there the enhancements and the mitigating aggravating factors that a judge uses to impose a sentence on the felony, or factors they look at on a misdemeanor sentence. You can address it there rather than have all that multiplicity of larceny. I mean, that's just one example. And while you're at it, you can be looking at it, like there's some law that, I mean, I was a domestic lawyer before I retired, and of course, we always used to get into adultery as far as alimony. And one of the things you always looked at was, well, the crime of criminal conversation, which is having sex with someone you're not married to. Well, in this day and time, is that really something that we should have on the books? But you always used it anyway because a person not only had the civil liability with the domestic case, but you also looked at the possibility of being charged with criminal conversation if that came out, but nobody. And so I said if everybody was charged with that, we would do a whole slew of new judges and courthouses to address it. But I'm just giving an example of
Sure.
the type of law that people look at in this day and time. Is that really something that we do? And I'm sure there are other adequate laws.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think several other panelists have mentioned that today. I mean, do we really need this? Do we still need it? That kind of thing. Senator Danny, what would you, if you could pull one page out to get started with, what would yours be?
Well, I think the way that right now I would approach this is to sort of take a page out of the regulatory reform process. And I don't know if everybody in the room is familiar with that, but it was probably one of the more successful things we've done, where we told every state agency to go into their regulations, look at what, categorize all of them as we need these, we might need these, or we don't need these. And lo and behold, they find things that, are outdated, like Ted's talking about. So I think what I would probably like to see is a process like that, where we tell the league, for example, Rose, to get your municipalities together and you kind of cross-reference all the ordinances you have, and you say these are the ones we need, these are the ones we might need, and these are the ones we don't need, and you come back to what I would probably put together as a joint House and Senate committee to work on it together, so we don't end up on different pages. But my ultimate goal would then be to have maybe a uniform set of municipal ordinances that would just be, like we've got uniform laws from other states, we could just have a uniform statute on municipal ordinances, and then they would have a menu to choose from that they could adopt. But they would find things that they would want to eliminate, and we would see things that we would want to eliminate, and so you'd have some back and forth about that. But just going through this county one, I would say that I could sort of categorize them in building construction, swimming pools, wells, unauthorized sort of business creation, and discharge of firearms. That was sort of probably the 5 biggest topics that I saw in there. So I imagine a lot of that's pretty similar across the state. But I think that's how I would like to see it, so that we don't have 300 municipalities with 300 sets of ordinances. We'd have more of a one uniform that they then kind of adopt pieces of.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're big fans of the periodic review with regulatory reform at the Locke Foundation. It's something we worked very hard and have advocated for. And my colleagues may need to help me with this, but I think the latest that we have on that through that regulatory reform process is 18% of our rules have been rolled off the books entirely. As with that review, it's been determined that, these are outdated, these are duplicative, they're just things we don't need anymore. So, I mean, that's a great model, I think, to overlay with this process.
And just as a suggestion to Justice Newby, there might be a lot of, I know you're a big historian, so there might be a lot of good material out there in some of these municipal ordinances for you to use in future addresses. It's probably a rich field of material.
Representative Stevens, where would you start?
I think I would agree with Ted that we start with Chapter 14 because I think that may be the lightest lift we have. I think being able to go, it's somewhat already categorized as, offenses against property and offenses against the moral decency and offenses against family or whatever. So they're somewhat categorized and we could probably eliminate a lot. I think one of the toughest but needs to be done is Chapter 20. How many people have been to DMV hell? It's you get into that system, you haven't paid a ticket or you have these problems, you can almost never get out. And I think that's one where we really could bring a lot of simplicity. You don't have a right to drive, you have a license to drive, but that's still pretty valuable. And we need to make sure people clearly understand that and take the parts of it that are criminal and move them over to 14. Get them into a common area where people can easily read through and figure out what to do and cross-reference them at different places. But we also have Chapter 90 with the drug offenses that we have to keep rewriting because they keep changing the formula on the drugs. They keep changing, what needs to happen. And we make the changes to accommodate new stuff, but we fail to go back and take out things that we perhaps don't need anymore. So, I think we've got a lot of work cut out for us, and I do think 14 is going to be the biggest, sort of easiest lift, to be honest.
That really might be something to think about as we move forward with this is, kind of pick a smaller elephant to try to handle. At the General Assembly, you all often look at pilot programs or ways to start small, work out some glitches and things, and so that might be something as you all are moving forward with this to think about and keep in mind. I also wanted to ask, get your thoughts on this. So all three of you are senior members in the General Assembly, and at least a couple of you have mentioned you're not going to be there forever. We've also heard today, just historically, the raise the age effort and some of these reforms that have taken place. I think raise the age was 20 years in the making to get that done. So we're talking about a long-term commitment here. You all are committed. You all have been leaders in this. Other legislators in the room have been leaders in this movement. What happens when you leave the General Assembly?
I want to enjoy retirement.
I think the more direct answer that you're looking for is what I said before, is I think we have to put a mechanism in place that reviews future laws, future created crimes, future created felonies. There should be some kind of review process to say that law already exists, just in a slightly different form. Do you need to tweak it, or do you need to end it? Or you have a review process. Periodically you review certain ones of the general statutes. I think you have to put something in place that lets the people know, sort of gives a history lesson, because if we forget where we came from, we're going to repeat the same process again and add all those incredible volume of laws again. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to have their plant stolen, and they're going to want to have a new law on the plant being stolen. And truly that is. I mean, that's, we are creatures of the public, and the public wants us to respond to a certain situation, and we feel a need to get out there and respond. And I've got to say, sometimes the Senate will do us the favor of, we've responded, but they'll kill it. We return the favor. They'll get something that became a big issue for them, and it gets to us, and we just kill it. But sometimes you get new people there and everything just goes through and you wind up with this assortment of bad things. But we need to probably have some historical knowledge at the General Assembly itself, a committee that will say, here's every criminal law needs to go through this, whether it's a staffing process or whatever, to say this law already exists.
Yeah, no matter what mechanism we all decide on how to do this, you don't want it to fall through the crack, which is exactly what you're referring to, and for the future. So I think it would be important for a legislative, some type of committee to be in existence, and their responsibility would be to at least annually look at any new laws that have come into effect. If do those new laws make other laws antiquated, or they make other laws that not necessary, or whatever, to perpetuate.
That regular review.
You just couldn't do the reforms, okay, that's it, we're fine. You'd have to keep something to keep it going.
So we're really talking about instituting a process that will be done by strong leaders, but the real strength is in the process. So as that leadership changes, the strength of the process remains for the reforms.
Well, and also, if you have, let's say you have that entity created, and you would have them report to the appropriate, like, I guess it's some public safety committee or some other judiciary committee or something, to make that thing go. I mean, they have that obligation, they know they've got an obligation, so they don't sit there on the walls and do nothing, they don't do what they're supposed to do and report like they're supposed to do, and that'll perpetuate itself.
One comment I'll make about that, though, is we do have the sentencing commission that tells us when they feel like the sentence is out of whack, and we don't always listen. So future legislators may not listen to us and still pass all of these extra extraneous laws. So you have to understand, we can't bind future legislators to not do something or to do something. We could simply give them the tools through some kind of process, give them the tools to say, this is duplication, this is unnecessary, or this makes so and such unnecessary. So that's the best we can do, is advise people sometimes for the future.
Senator Fanny.
All right, Warren, I know you got something to say.
Winky Wilkins used to say, a man with a memory in the legislature is a dangerous thing. So I think that sort of, in a way, says that what the point Becky's getting at is that when you lose some of your experience, you do, I guess, lose a resource. I mean, Skip Stam was a good example of a great resource we lost recently, who retired. But there's always new talented members who are coming in, and I think we just need to make sure that when we're putting together committees that we have a good balance of seniority and younger members, and so that if some of us decide that we're going to go home, that or the voters do, then we will have some people there that can pick up the torch. But I'd probably like to see the bulk of the heavy lift being done by the County Commission Association and the lead municipalities in terms of their particular issues, and that we kind of tell them what kind of car we want them to build, and they bring it back, and we'll look at their design and see if we want to tweak it a little bit or a lot. But I think that's where a lot of the heavy lifting could be done in terms of what those groups think they need to govern their cities and counties.
Very, very helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to, first of all, thank you all for your leadership and for serving on this panel and sharing your thoughts and ideas of where we might go. And I'm going to open it up now for questions for these folks. Yes, Jay. And if you would, just say who you are and who you're with when you ask your question. Thanks.
Jay Schweiker, Cato Institute. I think one of the points that emerged that there seemed to be consensus on, at least in the previous panel, is that this is an urgent problem with serious human costs. That given the state of overcriminalization, even if the sort that we're talking about here isn't contributing as much to long-term mass incarceration, it's putting misdemeanants in jail when maybe they shouldn't be in jail at all. It's pulling people away from their families and jobs, and contributing to a cycle of poverty and therefore criminality, especially by depriving them of licenses and the ability to obtain lawful employment. In the case of overlapping offenses, it's contributing to the problem of coercive plea bargaining. And then, of course, there's the financial cost borne by all taxpayers of carrying out all of this overcriminalization. And I'm not a legislator, and I don't have a sense of the administrative process that has to go through for something like this. But there seems to be the political will to address this, and some consensus on just how serious this problem is. And I guess my question is, do you agree that this is an urgent problem? And if so, isn't it at least incumbent upon the legislature to address this as quickly as possible and to make this one of, if not its top priorities, given that there is the political will apparently to address it?
One thing that I learned very quickly when I got into the House, there are 120 members, 120 different attitudes, 120 different priorities. And while we may think something is very important and want to act on it, that doesn't mean everybody else is going to as well. So one thing we have to do, in the Senate, there's 50. So they would need 26 people. We need 61. Is to educate our fellow members about what the problem is, what we want to do about it. And then there's a cost factor involved. You know, money's the root of all evil. It all comes down to money. So then you've got to go through your appropriation and make sure that the appropriation chairs understand why you think this is important and why it should move forward. So there are a lot of things to us it might seem like a no-brainer. It isn't necessarily the way it's going to be once you get over in our respective chambers and try to get it rolling. But like the juvenile justice, humongous cost, unbelievable cost. I remember when we had our first Justice and Public Safety meeting, when we were looking at the budget, we thought, well, and it was originally thought it was going to come from the Justice and Public Safety budget. Well, hell, when we found out how much it was going to cost to do it, that was more than our whole budget combined. So there are a lot of moving parts that will come into play with that. I understand what your question is, and a lot of people come to me and say, Ted, I don't understand why you guys aren't doing such and such. It seems to me there's no question about it, and then I have to think, because I know what all we have to go through to get something approved and also to get something financed.
Well, and what I'll say is, we've had a lot of discussion today about different ways to approach it. The people we have to deal with, and we don't have them all in one room like this, but imagine doubling the size of the number of people in this room and trying to sit down and get this problem completely worked out. Do you think we'd have it done today? Everybody has some different ideas, different approaches, different ways to do things. Then, not only do we sit here today and we talk about what we're going to do, it lingers out there for another month or so while it gets through this committee and that committee, and it gets through the House floor, and in the interim, people with other interests come in and petition their members to say, you don't need to do this, or you should do that way, you need to add this provision in there. Well, we really like the protecting the Venus flytrap, so that needs to be set out as a separate larceny. So that's the problem that you have, is people are reacting to those. So you get it all the way finally through, and you don't put that Venus flytrap in there, but you got somebody mad at you now, and it gets to the House floor, then you got to go over to the Senate and do the same process. You know, it is a sausage factory, as we said. Sometimes you get a good product in the end, but you surely sometimes don't want to see how it's made.
Well, let me just quickly, I think your point was about the urgency, maybe. So all of us answer to constituents, and I would probably say that if 100 of my constituents sat in this forum today and heard the information that was, put out from this stage, that they would probably, majority of them would probably agree that this is an issue that is important to them that we should address. But I don't know that I've had one constituent. First of all, I don't think I knew that this issue existed for the first 6 years of my time in the legislature. So in the last 3 years, it sort of popped up on the radar, primarily because of groups like John Locke that brought it to our attention. But I still don't know that I've ever had a single constituent contact that said, "Would you please fix the criminal law issue?" So I just don't know that it's an issue that's of concern that's resonating outside of sort of the think tank and legal circles. But personally, I think it's important to the public. It's one of these things that we probably know as legislators that we need to do. That's for the best of our constituents, but they don't really know, or they're not really concerned about it.
Just a quick point of information on that too, just because some of you in the room may not know this. All the work at the John Locke Foundation, the work that Mike and John have been doing, work from the Manhattan Institute, the Cato Institute, and others, anytime that information comes out, I email that to every member of the General Assembly with a little bit of an explanation of why this is important. And so this goes on continually. And every member of the General Assembly was invited to join us today. And I got notes from many of them who said they would love to be here, but for one reason or another, travel arrangements or whatever, were not able to be with us. But we will follow up, as we always do, with every single member of the General Assembly, give them a summary of what happened today, and invite them to be a part of the discussion. So please know that, from our aspect and what we do, we are inclusive of everyone. And then also, as our partnership with many of you all in this room and others as well, we bring them into the fold with our information as well. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Melissa Dowden from the Policy Watch. Senator Daniel mentioned that, this is an ask that legislators are typically unaccustomed to. And, it seems like historically, particularly conservatives, that, they've been very tough on crime stance. So I'm just wondering what the catalyst was for you guys that made you put criminal justice reform as a top priority. What made it?
I don't know that this is necessarily lessening a tough on crime situation. This is a making the code work. It's getting it in a form that everybody can deal with, and that everybody knows what's expected and not expected, what is or should be a crime, a comprehensive review that has not taken place before. Now, I could go into a little tangent here about how difficult some things are and how you finally get them done. The Senate and the House got together during the bust time, when the economy was really down, because builders were in trouble. They weren't getting paid. Lien law was a mess. We have a constitutional right to a lien, but things were really screwed up. So the House and the Senate said, this is, yes, a critical issue, we've got to tackle it. Ultimately, what happened is there was one legislator in the room with 50 other people who all had competing interests. No, we want to be first. We got to have ours. We need this. We need that. And I was the one legislator. The senator abandoned me, and it wasn't you, but the senator abandoned me and said, "Work it out, fix it." And so what I did was go bring out some person who had no interest in it, and I said, well, actually, she did have an interest in it. She said, "Nobody in here is worried about the innocent purchaser for value." So you've got to find that driving force. And then eventually you listened to what everybody had to say, but then you went and did the right thing. That's the same thing I think we're going to have here. So we're going to have lots of competing people who are going to come in and say, this is what you need to do, or you got to have this, you got to have that. And eventually we've got to decide, this is where we go. This is what we finally do. But I think we have to take that time to get everybody to the table first and to tackle those tough issues. And then we have to worry about getting the rest of. Everybody else was so bored and didn't want to hear lien law anymore that, I was able to get that passed pretty quickly. That and a boring video.
So I think your question is, what was the catalyst?
What was the catalyst?
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's that I didn't really realize that the legislature had delegated to 100 counties and 300 municipalities the ability to put people in jail, and probably 24 state agencies too. And so to me, that just seems insane. That we've got a green book, and you think if you pull the green book out, that should be all the crimes you could be found guilty of. But no, there's 300 other books out there in the state. So that's probably what was the.
What was the number today? You said 1,600 different agencies that can pass criminal laws.
There's roughly 650 municipalities or municipal jurisdictions, rather, including counties.
Right.
Along with, again, the 2 or 3 dozen state agencies, the General Assembly, and then the Common Law.
So for me, and I think Judge Newby will appreciate this, for me, it's to try to streamline the judicial system. I'm hearing more and more now about how we need money for more judges, we need money for more prosecutors, we need money for more courthouses, because the volume is getting so great. So to me, it seems like if we can streamline the criminal process to make lesser crimes so that we don't need all these additional facilities and all these additional personnel, that we can use our money in a much more efficient way, and plus by streamlining the position, be able to get cases straight. And the backlogs in some districts is horrible. And so that's where I would come from on this, and that's why I think we need to do it, why I'm interested in getting it done. It's not to get tough on crime. That's not it at all. I'll give you an example, get tough on crime. I did a bill this session on strengthening gang laws, which was definitely get tough on crime, because we have a very serious gang problem in Wilmington and throughout the state. But it passed the House, went to the Senate, and made some changes, and now we're going to Congress to try to work that out. Now, that's a get tough on crime bill. But this is not. This is an overall, let's streamline it, make it a more efficient process as it relates to all criminal laws.
Jesse?
Yes, Smith, school government. So there was some conversation earlier about raise the age to 20 years or whatever. It actually didn't. There were failed efforts over 20 years, but when Chief Justice Mark Martin appointed his commission in December of 2015, by 2017 there was historic bipartisan support on raise the age. And having been involved in that, one thing that was different about that process, and I'm interested whether you liked it or not, was that he appointed this broad bipartisan commission, and there was representation everywhere on it. There was lead prosecutor, district court judge, superior court judge, victims advocates, sheriff's association, police association, and on and on and on, that came together over a course of months to hash out a consensus proposal. It wasn't a proposal that everyone was happy with. Folks on the progressive side wanted it to go further. Folks on the other side were maybe uncomfortable, but it was a consensus proposal that then went forward with all that support to the General Assembly. Legislators were, of course, involved in that process as well. What is your thought about that type of a process for this kind of thing? Thumbs up, thumbs down, who knows?
That's sort of what I was getting at when I was using my example of how I go forward by that River Quality Committee, and that is get as many of the stakeholders as possible to get together and talk about it. Now, how else can you look at something unless you get all the different views? I mean, your view may be different than mine, but you may have a great idea. I might even have a great idea. A light bulb may go off in the head and I think of something good. But I've always been one. When I was a county commissioner, I was the same way. I wanted to hear from people, to get as many ideas as you can, because that's where you can come out with a good result. And you're right, there's give and take. Not everybody's going to be happy, so you have to try to reach a consensus where, as best you can, to make everybody happy, but more importantly, get something that's going to work.
And that's the same thing I said about the social services working group. It was a group of 30 people in the room, manageable enough to get some diversity of opinion. And that worked, but I think you may have to break this down into pieces as you go along. But you've got to have devoted legislators in there to get it to move any further. If you go to any other commission that doesn't have legislators on it, you find they have a very hard time getting the changes through that they want. Turning this back there.
Yeah, Rich.
Thank you. I've been on any number of commissions over the years, including one that Jesse's talking about, and in looking at which ones were successful and which ones failed, the common denominator for me is not who the people were on the commission, because they were always brilliant and they were always representative. The common denominator was the resources you were willing to spend on staff. If you're not willing to hire a reporter with some staff help who takes this on as his or her full-time commitment to try to drive this and make it happen, it will fall apart. If you try to rely on people who already have overly busy day jobs to just add this as one more task to what they're expected to do, it just won't happen. Part of the reason that Chief Justice's Commission worked, and frankly, it worked better at some groups than others, and I would tell you that that is entirely related to the extent to which various commissions were staffed and the commitment that the reporters made to the work of that subgroup. So legislature's got a little money now. I'd encourage you, if you're going to go this route, I mean, just put up some money and find that we've got brilliant law professors all over this state. You could find any number of whom would probably take this on. They've got bevies of law students at their behest to throw into this project. I can imagine a commission that you could give them a template and say, go through every one of these administrative regs and go through every one of these county and city ordinances and mark them according to this template. And then the commission can make the high-level decisions about what that body of work drives as a conclusion.
And that's what I was saying about between School of Government staff and legislative staff and people that do work on this on a full-time basis while we go home and try to earn a living because we can't live on $13,000 a year. We try.
Rich, let me do a follow-up if I could. So, I mean, what kind of ballpark money are we talking about? Do you know, I mean, you've got a chairman of an appropriations committee sitting right here. What ballpark?
I don't know, I'd set aside $250,000 to set up a commission to pay per diem and expenses for commissioners who meet throughout the state on a regular basis, and then to pay a reporter, and then let that reporter pay some hourly research assistants, just off the top of my head. But I ran a commission like this the last year as I was a judge, and that's about what we paid to come to a great result.
Thank you. Christine, did you?
I was going to ask a question about what appropriations were necessary, and so that kind of answers my question. And I'll just also point out that Chief Justice Lake established a study commission that had 32 members and stakeholders across the board, and that's how we got ID reform in North Carolina and reporting of interrogations and innocence inquiry commission. So that process has proven to work in a number of scenarios.
Thank you. Let's go to Vernon and then we'll go to Mike. Okay.
Mike Sheets.
Yeah. No, let Vernon. Did you have a question, Vernon?
I do.
Okay. And then we'll go to Mike.
Vernon Robinson, Black Americans, re-elected president. As a fellow Service Academy grad, I wanted to let the senator know, go Air Force, beat Army. It might not happen in the short term. But in a more serious vein, how much, of the 600 whatever jurisdictions, how many of them have complied with the requirement to send that document that you were showing us about, 16-page document? And secondly, having been a city councilman, there's lots of cities who bristle at the notion that they are creations of the legislature. And, I'm not sure you encourage them when you give them an extension. So how much of the extension is legitimate? How much is stonewalling? How much of it is that the counties and cities do not want to comply with the request? So anyway.
I don't know the answer to the how many. I do know. Okay, go ahead.
I think it was roughly 72 out of the 100 counties responded, and then the cities and towns, I think the compliance rate was less than 50%. However, the most recent bill changed the requirement and put kind of a population threshold on it. If you're above a certain population threshold, then you needed to respond, and then it added some additional incentive to respond that wasn't part of the first bill.
Incentive or stick?
It's been pulling teeth a little bit.
There's no attitude against it or anything. It's truly.
We'll take just a couple more quick questions. Saber, let you go.
Question, but as a matter of history, in 1985, the Criminal Code Revision Study Committee at that time introduced a bill in the legislature that read Chapter 14, which is probably the place you want to start in looking at Chapter 14. It codifies all the common law principles, establishes different states of mind. It is a wonderful place to start.
Thank you. And I think we have that report, don't we, Mike?
We have
Yes.
tracked it down.
Okay,
It's,
yeah. Saber brought hers today, but we do have it. Okay, last question to you, quickly.
So if we look at what we had in Senate Bill 584 and the reporting requirements and legislative review of any new administrative rule that criminalizes behavior, that's where we are now. Somewhere in the future, it's kind of indeterminate. We've had different answers on how long it might take. We have a recodified criminal code, but also a changed approach to the way we create new crimes. If that's where we're headed, what is the next step? What is the next piece of information that needs to be put in the hands of the legislatures to help them start to move forward? I know Senator Daniel suggested the yes, no, and maybe on the ordinances to kind of mirror the regulatory reform process. Is there something that the eggheads like me at a think tank can do to put more information in your hands to push the process forward?
Yes, no, maybe, duplicate.
Well, I think that the judge back here had a good point about that type of structure. What I would like to see is, if you can show me a flow chart of how this information is going to get synthesized, transferred to the legislature, and then passed into law, the best flow chart, give me 3 or 4 of those to choose from, and I'll pick what I think is the best working flow chart of how to get that done, and that might be the best way, or something that Representative Davis said might be the best way, but that's sort of just, I think, in terms of show me a flow chart, and if I could understand it, then.
Yeah, we gotta figure out which direction we wanna go, sooner than later. And then once we figure out what direction we wanna go, like Warren was saying, we can move on that.
So please help me thank this panel for legislative participation. Also, just a couple things before you go. First of all, thank you all so much for being with us all day. I mean, this has just been great to have you all in the room. Thank you for your leadership in moving this forward. As you can tell, we've got a lot of work to do, and it's not going to happen without you. So thank you so much. Thank you to Cato for co-hosting this event with us. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to my colleagues at the John Locke Foundation for always putting on a great event, and also your expertise and enthusiasm for these kind of things. I mentioned materials and stuff that we have done at the Locke Foundation. We had a whole table that was full of materials, all of which have been taken, which is great. But what I'll do in the meantime is, I think we have everybody's email address. If we don't, give it to me before you leave. Give me your card, call me, just call the Locke Foundation, make sure that we have it. But I will send you an email in the next couple of days with links to all those materials, some of the research papers that we've done and that kind of thing, so that you'll have that. And also, you'll have our contact information, and we can stay in touch. And finally, I'd like to invite you to join us on the terrace. If you go out these doors to the right, the terrace is open, and we have a bar and hors d'oeuvres and continued great conversation. Thank you so much.